In 1994, the first commercial GMO food was introduced. It was a tomato spliced with Arctic fish genes for disease resistance, as well as to hold up better in freezing conditions. But the tomato's pH also dropped to be more acidic. To me, this sounds like a good thing. Don't we want our food to last longer and be more resistant to the elements? Are the people who are against GMOs simply stuck in olden ways, not accepting better developing technology, or am I ignorant, and is there really a conspiracy to genetically modified organisms? It's important to note that someone does not have to be a conspiracy theorist to be against genetically modifying organisms. That is a perfectly reasonable thing to not want, as it is the way organisms have always been. The first genetically modified crop, an antibiotic-resistant tobacco plant, was produced in 1982. The first food was the previously mentioned tomato from the United States. A Chinese study that looked into the connection between information exposure and the attitudes regarding genetically modified organisms offered a contextualized explanation of the influencing elements, with conspiracy theories serving as facilitators. The study tested the mechanism of information exposure on people's opinions towards GMOs. 518 Chinese individuals were polled in 2022. People's emotions towards GMOs and information exposure were found to be strongly and directly related. Conspiracy theory beliefs were also important. The more precise outcomes are, conspiracy theories have a more negative impact on people's willingness to eat genetically modified foods. It also decreased confidence in the potential for GMO advancement. When people were exposed to official information, their belief in conspiracies deteriorates. This boosted their interest in eating genetically modified foods. I don't know about y'all, but that is a lot of big words, and it's difficult for simply-minded me to understand. Seems like the findings of the studies are obvious. If people are exposed to anti-GMO conspiracies, they are going to think more negatively about them. How about we explore the conspiracies before we look at the counter-arguments that GMOs are safe and even beneficial? What are people saying about GMOs, and is there any truth to it? One argument is that pesticide organizations created and promoted GMOs in order to make crops more susceptible to pests and need the use of additional pesticides. Possible, but is there any evidence? Anti-GMO campaigners claimed the retraction of a widely criticized research paper that alleged negative effects of GMOs in lab rats, saying that they are more susceptible to brain tumors, was part of a conspiracy to hide the truth. Is there any evidence to this, or is it just a claim? This is the controversy surrounding the publishing and retraction of the research journal article by a French molecular biologist. It was initially published in 2012 by Food and Chemical Toxicology, detailing a 2-year feeding trial in rats that revealed a rise in tumors given genetically modified corn and the herbicide Roundup. Scientists came to the conclusion that the study's approach was flawed and its conclusions were unreliable. The study's use of a strain of rat which produces tumors at a rapid rate over the course of its lifetime led to criticism that each component of the study contained too few rats to generate statistically significant data. The French Society of Toxicologic Pathology argued that it was misleading to only include photographs of treated rats in the article without including control rats, because such tumors are typically observed in older rats. Food and Chemical Toxicology retracted the publication in November 2013 after receiving harsh criticism from other academics and the author's refusal to withdraw it. They claimed that the removal was necessary since the article's data was inconclusive and its findings incorrect. Similar studies that he published suggests that the corn produced by Monsanto was unhealthy for rats, leading to changes in weight, triglyceride levels in females, changes in composition of male urine, and decreased function or organ damage in liver, kidney, and adrenal glands, and the circulatory system. The European Food Safety Authority concluded that the paper used improper statistical techniques and that all blood chemistry and organ weight results were within the usual range for control animals. The EFSA came to the conclusion that the data did not support the author's claim that many of the statistical criticisms of the 2007 study were still applicable to the 2009 analysis, and that there was no new information in the 2009 study that would have changed the author's conclusions. After receiving the 2009 study, a different French scientific committee came to the conclusion that it provides no legitimate scientific data likely to contribute to any toxicity to the 3 reanalyzed GMOs. In a 2011 article, his lab found that the effects of genetically modified foods on the liver and kidney were sex and dose dependent, and recommended longer and more thorough toxicology tests for regulatory approval after reviewing data from 19 published animal feeding studies. Another study was conducted in 2012. 200 rats, 100 male and 100 female, were placed into 20 groups of 10 each. On the males and females, 10 diets were tested independently. The diets contained regular laboratory rat food that had not been genetically modified, and 11%, 22%, and 32% genetically modified corn. A control group's diet included standard laboratory rat food with 33% non-GMO corn. The study found in females all treatment groups died 2 to 3 times more frequently and rapidly than controls, though this was only visible in 3 male groups fed GMOs. All findings were sex and hormone dependent. Numerous scientific organizations questioned the findings of the report. With few exceptions, the scientific community disregarded the study and demanded that the scientific journals implement a more stringent peer review process. The rats tested have a lifespan of roughly 2 years and are highly susceptible to developing cancer. I don't know about you, but I'm bored about talking about rats eating GMOs. Let's move on. A Latvian study revealed that a portion of the population believed that GMOs were a part of a larger conspiracy theory to poison the population of that country. In Turkey, conservative political and religious figures who opposed GMOs believed they were a conspiracy by Jewish multinational companies and Israel for world domination. I do not know why they are blaming Israel for the GMOs, as they started in China and the United States, but conservatives can be difficult to understand. When starting to research GMO conspiracies, I honestly did not think Jews would be involved. China published news articles that opposed GMOs and supported conspiracy theories, including the view that the West was using genetic engineering to establish a global control over agriculture and that genetically modified products were instruments of genocide. Fear that big agribusiness, particularly Monsanto, are attempting to compromise the public's health and safety by introducing and marketing GMOs in the food supply is a key component to many conspiracy theories. One accusation is that Monsanto purposely conceals scientific proof that GMOs are harmful. The American Food and Drug Administration and the American Association for the Advancement of Science have backed the scientific evidence for the safety of genetically engineered food that is available for human consumption, according to some anti-GMO activists who claim that Monsanto infiltrated both organizations. In 2003, a poll in Europe found the public is neither accepting nor rejecting of GMOs. Instead, they only had questions. Why do we need GMOs? Who benefits from their use? Who decided that they should be developed and how? Why were we not better informed about their use in our food before their arrival on the market? Why are we not given an effective choice about whether or not to buy these products? Have potential long-term and irreversible consequences have been seriously evaluated. They discovered that because scientific reasoning cannot provide an answer to these concerns, the public's understanding of science does not influence general opinion. The public is perfectly aware that their lives are full of risks that need to be counterbalanced against each other and against the potential benefits, and typically does not demand zero risk in conversations about genetically modified food. They wanted a more realistic assessment of hazards by regulatory agencies and GMO producers, not necessarily zero risk. According to a research paper on consumer surveys conducted in Europe in 2009, less people were opposed to GMOs than previously thought, and 80% of respondents did not actively avoid GMOs when shopping. According to a 2019 survey, only 27% of Europeans indicated that they were concerned about GMOs. The level of fear has decreased by half in just 9 years since the same study was conducted in 2010. More people are less worried about certain subjects, such as concerns about genome editing. On its own, only concerns 4%. 34% of American consumers expressed very or extreme concern about genetically modified food in 2010, down 3% from 2008. The same poll revealed gender differences. 16% of women were extremely concerned, compared to 10% of men. 16% of women were unconcerned, compared to 27% of men. According to a New York Times poll, 93% of Americans want genetically modified food to be labeled. The March Against Monsanto was a protest against the company which manufactures Roundup and GMOs. In response to the rejection of California Proposition 37, a ballot measure that would have mandated the labeling of foods containing GMOs, that's odd to me that it's not something that lawmakers would want to pass. I wonder why.
People have a right to know what they're eating. Most people do think that they have the right, but those rights will never be upheld as long as corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money to influence the outcomes of elections.
They have no right to mess with our food. You don't turn food into a lab experiment.
Demonstrations against the company took place in over 50 countries on Saturday.
The initial march was on May 25, 2013. It's unclear how many protesters participated. Estimates of hundreds of thousands, and from the organizers 2 million, have both been made. I'm surprised that that many people cared about GMOs. Would we see numbers like this today? Can we please protest about the economy and inflation sometime, please? Hundreds of cities all throughout the world, especially in the United States, hosted events. Many demonstrations were held in Southern California, and some protesters carried posters that said, "Label GMOs, it's our right to know," and support a mandatory labeling of GMOs and real food for real people. Monsanto asserted that while they respected people's rights to their own opinions, their seeds enhanced agriculture and enabling farmers to get more out of their land while preserving resources like water and electricity. The business reaffirmed that genetically modified goods were secure and increased crop productivity. GMO research has been interrupted worldwide by activist groups including Earth Liberation Front and Greenpeace. As of 2014, protesters have destroyed 80 agricultural experiments conducted by university or government research facilities in the UK. Threats and acts of violence against people and property have occasionally been committed. Activists set fire to Michigan State University's biotech lab in 1999, destroying the products of years of labor and $400,000 worth of property. Those aren't protesters, those are rioters. I do agree rioting can sometimes be necessary. I personally disagree with it in this situation. When the ice minus strain of P. cingray bacteria was sprayed on a California strawberry field in 1987, it became the first genetically modified organism to be released into the environment. The spraying of a crop of potato seedlings followed. Activist groups uprooted the plants in both test fields, but were quickly replanted the following day. When Greenpeace protesters stormed into scientific offices in 2011 and destroyed a plot of genetically modified wheat, the organization had to pay damages. The sentenced judge charged Greenpeace with exploiting less experienced members clinically to avoid jeopardizing their own freedom. The preparation uprooted by protesters in 2013. The perpetrators received 9-month sentences with a suspension. In the Philippines, an experimental field of golden rice was uprooted by protesters in 2013. The goal of golden rice is to stop vitamin A deficiency, which annually blinds and starves hundreds of thousands of children in underdeveloped nations. I admit I am ignorant, but I do not understand why someone would be against this. I am bored of talking about protesters. Let's talk about genetically modified mosquitoes. Viruses including Zika and malaria are spread by mosquitoes. Many regions in the United States are inhabited by mosquitoes. A community's mosquito population can be reduced by genetically altering mosquitoes. The Environmental Protection Agency in the United States has improved the release of genetically modified non-biting male mosquitoes in certain counties in Texas and Florida.
In California, this drone is on the defensive. In Florida, trucks are on the hunt. All of it in a battle with the tiniest but most serious of threats. Mosquitoes, which for the first time in 20 years are responsible for locally transmitted malaria spreading in parts of the U.S. 6 cases in Florida and 1 in Texas near the Mexico border.
This approval enables neighborhood mosquito control programs to assess how well genetically modified mosquitoes work at lowering mosquito populations in the areas where they have been released. I thought scientists were only genetically modifying plants. This is new to me, though it seems like a good thing. I know insect populations are dwindling, and that's concerning, but do we really care if mosquitoes go extinct? That seems like it would be a positive. I am well aware insects are necessary for pollination, but are mosquitoes anything but pests? 2 different types of genes are mass-produced in a lab in these mosquitoes. A self-limiting gene that limits the lifespan of female mosquito offspring. A fluorescent marker gene that shines when exposed to a certain red light, which allows scientists to recognize these mosquitoes in the wild. These traits have been shown to be passed down to their eggs. The self-limiting gene carrying mosquito eggs are dispersed throughout the region. They are ready to mate with wild females once they have hatched and reached adult stage. Offspring inherit the genes from their parents. Female offspring pass away before reaching adulthood. The reduction of mosquito population is an anticipated outcome. This seems to be a good thing to me, but conspiracy communities are saying multiple things. Like they actually believe that they are to spread diseases and to make Big Pharma more money. There is no evidence for this. It is just what they are saying. They are also saying mosquitoes will be turned into flying vaccinators. Bill Gates has funded $18 million into this. I can see why people are suspicious. I mean, I too am slightly. But it's not unbelievable that the government and Bill Gates would want to decrease diseases spread by mosquitoes. Important to note that there are other animals being genetically modified, like salmon, to have more growth hormones for consumption. These salmon show reduced swimming ability and higher levels of aggression. Perhaps it's not too good of a thing to genetically modify animals until we do more research into it, but it seems like genetically modifying insects and plants have a positive outcome. Although there's still some complaining about GMOs, it mainly comes from a small but passionate minority. Most people simply don't care about GMOs since they're more concerned with more important and relevant issues. The safety of genetically modified crops is acknowledged by virtually every scientific organization in the world in terms of health and humans and the environment. Over 3,000 scientific studies have evaluated the safety of these crops, and 284 institutions worldwide agree that GMO crops are safe. The National Academies of Science performed the most thorough analysis, enlisting specialists from a variety of food and agricultural fields to analyze data gathered over time. They all reached the same conclusion. There is no solid evidence that there are differences in the biohazard to humans' health posed by conventional and currently commercially acceptable genetically modified crops. And there is also no proof that genetically modified crops have an adverse effect on the environment. GMO visibility dropped by 26% in 2020 compared to 2019, and the number of social media posts on the subject dropped by 39%. Additionally, from 68% in 2019 to 78% in 2020 in both traditional and social media. Additionally, there was a decline in anti-GMO conspiracy theories on social media in 2020, maybe as a result of the accounts that usually spread these messages concentrating on more viral conspiracies. Journalists are increasingly using a positive or neutral tone when reporting on GMOs, which reflects the scientific agreement on their safety. GMOs are valuable to farmers around the world as they increase yields while spending less on fertilizer, herbicides, as well as other inputs. Both small-scale farmers and those who operate much larger farms can attest to this. For instance, small farmers in Bangladesh who grew eggplants that was genetically modified to withstand the devastating fruit beetle reduced their usage of pesticides by 62% and more than doubled their income, with an increase of 112 times from 1996 to 2019 due to GMO advantages. 190 million acres of genetically modified crops were grown in 29 different countries in 2019, with 56% of these countries being developing ones. Notably, the introduction of GMO crops is increasing across South Asia and Africa. After much discussion, the Philippines this year legalized the growing of golden rice, and regulatory process for eggplants is underway. Insect-resistant genetically modified cowpea and cotton have previously been approved in Nigeria, and it is currently moving towards the adoption of genetically modified rice that is salt-tolerant, insect-resistant, and water and nitrogen efficient. Genetically modified cotton has been adopted in Kenya despite the country's current GMO restrictions, and genetically modified corn was approved in 2022. This pattern is expected to persist as African scientists work more and more on projects that use biotechnology tools to improve crops essential to small farmers' ability to support themselves and food security. Small farmers dominate Brazil's agricultural industry, which is quickly becoming another GMO powerhouse. Brazilian public sector researchers have created a genetically modified pinto bean that is resistant to a devastating plant disease, in addition to cultivating commodity crops like corn and soybean, which is currently offered at the nation's supermarket stores. This year, Brazil also made history by becoming the first nation to permit The importation of GMO wheat flour supporting a crop created in Argentina, a neighboring country that has already embraced agricultural biotechnology. It's encouraging to see politicians put politics aside and concentrate on what their countries and farms really need. Although consumers have unknowingly benefited from genetically modified crops due to increased yields that control pricing and lower pesticide burdens that result in healthier food, almost all of the genetically modified crops created have been designed with farmers' interests in mind. As new products with features that directly benefit and represent their values, such as improved nutrition, better taste, and more sustainable agricultural practices hit the market, it is conceivable that consumers will develop a similar affection for genetically modified crops. Malnutrition is another major moral facing our time. Similar to childhood diseases preventable by vaccination, those who cannot afford food with high nutritional values may benefit greatly from GMOs, like foods altered to help with vitamin deficiency and drought-resistant crops, which will become more and more important in the global south due to climate change. The paranoid and ignorant, however, who insist that GMOs, which are biologically identical to natural crops, are somehow harmful, have hindered true progress. The 1989 Andrew Wakefield study linking the MMR vaccine with autism and the 2012 French rat study linking GMOs with cancer are just two examples of retracted scientific studies that have been used to discredit the anti-vaccine and anti-GMO movements while ignoring the overwhelming body of evidence against them. Both result in injustice. I would love to do in-depth research on vaccination, but only if it is wanted. So if you are interested, please let me know. Contrasted with the atrocities committed by the anti-vaccine movement, it may appear that the anti-GMO movement is harmless, that the non-GMO labels on grocery items are the only result of anti-GMO thinking. It turns out that there is a human cost. The same movement that encourages manufacturers to choose non-GMO ingredients also has an impact on international regulatory organizations. Researchers in Tanzania were compelled to burn test fields of drought-tolerant corn rather than provide food for starving local children, as drought is one of the many causes of hunger and is one of the biggest contributors to crop loss in these regions of Africa. Disease-resistant bananas, a staple commodity in Uganda and Eastern Africa that are threatened by bacterial wilt, are being withheld from farmers and people who need them, causing these disease-resistant crops to become extinct as a result of ideological restriction. Genetically modifying organisms to be resistant to diseases is a good thing that saves many lives, especially for the people who aren't privileged enough to have as much access to food as you or I do.